Good evening and welcome back to blackdoctor.org. This is a special edition of the Ask Dr. Renee show an hour later. But this is, as I told you before, it's Allergy and Asthma Awareness Month. And today's show is about asthma. And I have one of the biggest experts I feel in the world on asthma talking with us tonight. So I'm very excited about that. Please, housekeeping, don't forget to share. Sharing is caring. I guarantee you know somebody that has asthma and or allergies and they need this information. Two, please feel free to drop in the chat and let us know where you're watching from. And three, if you have questions, type them in the chat and I will do my best to watch them so I can see if we can get them answered during the show, if not afterwards. But I hope that everyone will enjoy this show about one of my favorite topics for obvious reasons. If you've watched before, then you know why. But let's get our guest. Our guest today is Dr. Michael Lenoir, who is not a stranger to Black Doctor at all. He hosts African American Wellness Watch on blackdoctor.org. And he is my co-host on Black Doctor Speak podcast. So if you are not subscribed to that podcast, something is wrong with you. You need to make sure you subscribe. But welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us this evening. I know you're an extremely busy man.
Not too busy. Anytime we can provide information, we're always happy to do so.
Awesome sauce. Well, let's get right into it. So can you just, the basics, what's the difference between allergies and asthma?
Well, asthma is a disease of the lung, characterized by bronchoconstriction and mucosal edema, cellular infiltration. So it stands alone because there are a number of conditions that can cause that. One of those conditions is allergy, because the cells that are most effective in the lung that are causing the problem are histamine-mediated cells, the same cell that allergy uses. And so consequently, allergy is a trigger for asthma, but asthma is a whole separate problem with a number of different triggers and a number of different what we call pathophysiologic issues.
So you already explained how the allergy and asthma are connected. So basically, asthmatics have triggers, and those triggers usually are the allergens.
Right. Yeah. So that no, there's no question that, especially this time of year, that most of the patients who have asthma on a periodic seasonal basis are having it on the basis of allergy. Let me take the time to close the door. I have a practice in people. It seems like there's a little bit more.
You know, I will tell you guys, it sounds like, because I didn't realize he was at work, it sounds like the time when I got my very first scratch test for my not my first time, this last time when I was 10. I got my scratch test for my food, my allergies, and they tested me for all the food allergies and environmental. And
Right.
I hooped and hollered like that. I was the last patient of the day. I think that was on purpose. And I was hollering. It was awful. I
Yeah.
was so miserable.
Yeah. Well, then, no question that sometimes that testing process, and sometimes that testing process is too excessive. I think most allergists do too many allergy tests. And I think without a historical uh, evidence that these tests are going to really give you information. I think that the patient information has more validity than the allergy test. And
Right.
the allergist doesn't know what you're reactive to before he does the test or suspect, then the test shouldn't be done.
Well, my allergist, whom you probably do know, I'll tell you her name in a minute. But my allergist was the first Black female physician I ever saw. She ended up being my pediatrician because my mother fired our white Jewish pediatrician because he was going to kill me. And so we had an emergent situation. He said, "Come to my urgent care." My mother took me to the urgent care and
Uh,
they asked her so many questions. And I'm sitting on this, one of those, what do you call them? Like it's not a chair, but it's like I don't know, bean bag. That's what it was. And I'm struggling to try and figure out a good position so I could breathe. And it was awful. So when the lady finally went in the back, my mother, she came and said, "We're leaving because we can't wait any longer." So we drove on to the ER. And my mother ended up having to pull over on the way to the ER because I couldn't respond. And
Oh,
she was
wow.
like, Renee. And I heard her. I remember like it was yesterday, but I literally couldn't even blink. Like I couldn't do anything. So she pulled over, ran around the car, Renee. And I guess my eye flipped open and she realized I was still breathing and ran back around the car and drove to the ER.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that was the last time I ever saw that man. And actually, we didn't even see him that day. And we never went back to him. And she said, I am more than happy to take care of the girls. But and so I guess I never knew that it was rare to have black doctors because she was the one that I knew that,
Yeah, well,
saved my life all the time. But it was Dr. Marva Morris.
sure, I know more. Yeah,
I
right.
knew it. And and so she was on
Exactly.
top of things. I was wheezing all the time and was allergic to everything. And
Yeah,
she was going to get to the bottom of it.
yeah. Well, I had a similar career. I trained as an allergist and served as consultant in allergy for Sixth Army area, lots of things. And then when I went into practice, I practiced just allergy and asthma. But after about 5 years, it was pretty clear to me that my community needed as much primary care as it needed allergy. And I can integrate the two. So for most of my career, I practiced both pediatrics and allergy. And what you heard there, my allergy days are Monday and Friday. My pediatric days are Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So what you heard was a little kid getting a shot. So he had every right to scream like that.
Every right. Every right. So you just said it. Can you speak to why Black communities are disproportionately impacted by asthma and allergies? You just spoke about how your community needed you.
Well, let's first put off the table that it's genetic differences between African Americans and other Americans as it relates to asthma. That's just not true. I think that if we start to look for reasons, one of the things I found out early when I started seeking information, especially on the African American Wellness Project, was that for almost every chronic disease, the difference between the health of African Americans and other Americans is really what happens after the diagnosis is made. That means that allergies, asthma is a disease caused by triggers, and many of those triggers have to be disproportionate in African American communities, especially pollution. We're
Mm-hmm.
increasingly understand how pollution not only affects asthma, but affects the lung itself and the cells that are related there. Usually, there's a lot of chemicals in our environment. A lot of dumps are near our environments. And then obviously we don't have the facilities or the resources in our communities to adequately take care of many underserved patients because there's too many, and asthma is a chronic disease which requires kind of ongoing management. There's just not enough people to do the job. If we want to delve into foods as triggers for asthma and certainly for allergy, there's no grocery stores in our neighborhoods, and so we're much more impacted by the social determinants of health than we are by the actual genetics or responses to medication. None of that is different between African Americans and other Americans, but it's how we're treated around that. Unconscious bias on the part of physicians who look at us differently and always plan for us differently. They don't want to give us the information we need, commit to take care of us long term, because for many of them, they don't think we need that. So I think if we look at the differences between outcomes for African Americans for other Americans, it really has to do with how we're treated, not
Mm-hmm.
what we're treated with or how we respond to medication. There really is no genetic difference.
Yeah. And it's and even my lovely city that I live in, Chicago, we were like, I think we're number one for worst cities for asthmatics to live in
Mhm.
because of the air pollution.
Yeah. Well, I think every city, if you look at the details, it's relative in different cities, but you'll find that African Americans do worse.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not, and look, we can't exempt our own behavior. I mean, we have a lot of suspicion in the healthcare system. We're not focused on the maintenance of chronic disease like
Right.
asthma, which requires ongoing medications and studies and reassessments. And what we tend to do is and as a community, we tend to believe that asthma is kind of it's not a chronic disease. It's just a symptom. And so we tend to just take medicine when we need it and don't use it when we don't need it. Now, what's interesting about the medicines that are out there now, they understand that. because most of the medicines now are combinations of both bronchodilators and inhaled and inflammatory anti-inflammatory agents. Medicines like Supra and Symbicort, and Advir. Those drugs are combinations of both long-acting beta agonists and inflammatory anti-inflammatory agents, which is important because you got to open up the airway, and chronically you got to take care of the cells. And so now they can be used whenever you have a symptom, especially those that have as one of their components a fast-acting, long-acting beta agonist like formoterol. So the thinking has changed a little bit, I believe, in that the industry is focused. The asthma treatment industry, not the drug companies, is focused on taking care of patients when they have symptoms. And it's still important to understand that even though you're not wheezing or short of breath, you still have some asthma and should be treated on a regular basis. But the acute treatment of asthma incorporates in its structure both bronchodilators and anti-inflammatory agents.
Yeah, the for whatever reason in our community, just like a little bit of sugar, they just, oh, he just has trouble breathing when he
Yeah,
does this or does that. And no one has ever diagnosed this person with asthma. And it's like, uh, or I get bronchitis every year around this time. No, you probably have allergies,
yeah.
might have asthma.
I think that there are a lot of people who misunderstand how asthma works.
Hmm.
They only think that they have asthma when they're symptomatic, short of breath, or wheezing, when really asthma is kind of a steady state disease. So that it just takes a little bit to trigger you from being, relatively comfortable into being serious, having serious respiratory distress. And so I think that under those circumstances, we tend to only treat it as an acute disease only, not as a chronic disease. And so I think that has to change. Also, there's some misconceptions about exercise-induced asthma. Exercise-induced asthma usually classically is vagal mediated and occurs after exercise is over. Most asthma that occurs during exercise is poorly controlled, regular asthma manifested by exercise.
Hmm.
So if you have asthma every time you exercise, you need to be treated as a chronic problem, not as an acute problem simply solved by the use of bronchodilators.
Yeah, and I have the story in my book that I started training for a half marathon, and I started with couch to 5K, then I did couch to 10K. But what I did was, because of those programs, it's run, walk, then I wasn't killing myself. Two, I used my inhaler before I started the workout. So then because what I figured out is if I did that, by the end of it, it didn't take me 30 minutes to catch my breath,
Mm-hmm.
and I was okay. And by the time, before I think I got to the race, I had a doctor's appointment. We did the pulmonary function test, and my doctor was blown away and was like, "What are you doing?" And I mean, "What are you talking about? What am I doing?" And he said, "Your pulmonary function test is really improved compared to before." And I go, "Oh, I've been training for this half marathon." He was like, "Keep it up, keep it up." And I'm like, "Really?" And so that was the evolution of my lungs changing
Yeah,
to where and eventually, I think it was a year later, he told me I didn't have to take my daily meds anymore. I took Advair at the
yeah,
time. He's like, "You don't have to take it anymore. Make sure you have your rescue inhaler. If you get in trouble," and we had an action plan of what I need to do. And
mm-hmm.
so I've been off of daily meds now for, I think it's been like 6 years, 7 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was what really transformed everything. And now I run all the time,
Yeah.
and
Well,
I
your
run
story,
outside, which
yeah,
is
your
amazing.
story is very inspiring because you were very sick,
Hmm.
and you took control of yourself and you took control of your asthma. And I think that there's no rationale really for anybody to be in the emergency room hospital with asthma if it's properly managed. But management is a combination. It's a collective between the doctor and the patient. The doctor has responsibilities to talk to you about what causes it and what would prevent triggers and what proper treatment should be. But you have the responsibility of understanding it's a chronic disease and you need to take care of it on a daily basis yourself. Because I don't think I've had a patient admitted to the hospital with asthma in probably a year
Oh,
because there's
great.
so many things that we can do now. Even when they have RSV, and they start wheezing, the hospital doesn't admit them unless they're seriously in respiratory distress. So if you stick with me, then I think I can keep you from being in the emergency room and being in the hospital. And it requires a couple of things. It requires their ability to access you when they need to. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I'm the only one that can prescribe albuterol in this office. So I'm going to give you a month's supply. And if you're out of it in 2 weeks or three, I don't have to ask you about control. I don't need sophisticated pulmonary function studies or nitrogen oxide. I know you're overusing your medication, and then you need to, and you need to be aware that if you're using your asthma pump as much as once or twice a week, or certainly 3 or 4 times a month, your asthma is not well controlled. And so I got my hands on that albuterol. Now you can call me, and you can get your grandmother to call, and anybody else you need to, and I will let you. I will send you to the emergency room, but I'm not going to refill your albuterol because you need to understand. I don't want to be involved in a situation where people are not understanding what I'm telling them. So I've got to give them several explanations. But if all those explanations don't get you to take your medicine on a regular basis, then I know one thing: the one drug you will hang on to is albuterol.
This is true. And you know what? It was a long time ago here on Black Doctor. You talked about how many inhalers a person goes through in a month or something, and that's how you know it's not controlled. I had
Right,
never heard that.
right,
And I was like, huh? And I told my mom. My mother goes, well, it makes sense. I go, it does make sense. But I
right.
will say that because I've had asthma for 48 years, almost 49, things have changed a whole lot. Because my mom is a respiratory therapist, and I had the most amazing allergists as a kid,
Yeah,
and I was sickly. But it was not their fault. It was literally the drugs just weren't as great as they are now. I took
yeah,
theater, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I
yeah,
took that for a long time as a kid.
yeah,
I used to take Aerobid, but then I
yeah,
told the doctor it tastes nasty.
yeah,
I ain't taking it, and
yeah.
and so I had been
Yeah,
through
yeah,
Flovent, Ceravent. I had been through the whole gamut,
yeah,
and
people have to,
finally
yeah,
Advair is where I must say things got.
yeah. Well, people have to understand that their medicines in those days were what we call both alpha beta drugs. That means they had an impact on the respiratory system, but they also had an impact on the cardiac system. And so I've seen a number of patients, those that have passed on with asthma in my own practice, were over medicated with those drugs. But now most of the drugs have been streamlined, and we're doing mostly with beta drugs and almost no alpha effect. Although you can get in trouble by continuously overusing albuterol, but the cardiac impacts of the drugs we have now are much less than they were then. Those were dangerous drugs. That Theodore, you remember that Theodore? That the aminophylline. You remember aminophylline?
Yes,
You could
yes.
tell when you made rounds in the hospital who was on aminophylline. They'd be jumping out of the crib and trying to get out of the
My
bed.
mom had to explain to the people at school because I just was very active, and she's like, "It's her medication."
But people need to hear this. They need to hear this. You need to hear this. There's no reason for you or your children to be in the hospital with asthma or the emergency room with what we have to work with now.
Exactly.
Understand, understanding your triggers, eliminating those, using the appropriate medication, and giving you access when you have an acute problem, either my cell phone number or something like that. We can keep you out of the emergency room and out of the hospital, except at times when these infections kind of take over. And reactive airway disease is a component of a pneumonia or bronchiolitis,
Flu
something
and
like
stuff
that.
like that.
But for the average person who has asthma listening to this program, if you're in that ER often, if you're in the emergency room, in the hospital all the time, something is wrong with the way you're being managed or the way you're managing yourself.
And that's what I have been trying to tell people in the last few years. I've said several times, like,
Right?
something's not right. Like, your asthma is not under control, and there's no reason. There's way too many medications on the market that you should be able to get it under control.
Yeah, yeah,
And these are people who had asthma not as severe as mine. So I was like,
yeah,
well, why are you so sickly when I
yeah.
used to carry an oxygen tank in a backpack?
Yeah, see, so yeah, so that no, I just think that that you let me say it individually, you can't assign fault.
Right.
Simply saying though that if your child is under in good medical management and still going to emergency from the hospital, it's not good medical management. But if you're not taking the medicines that the manager asks you to take, or if you're not avoiding the triggers, which is probably more important, or the foods that cause problems, or are taking advantage of the environmental accommodations you can make to your illness, then that's you. That's on you.
Right.
You're
And
not,
that's something we talked about too here. I've said how, when you live in a rent controlled environment, there's
right.
only so much you can do. But if but you can buy
Yeah.
sheets, you can buy mattress covers, pillowcase covers. You can make sure that when you clean your house, you're cleaning with the proper products because all
You
those
can kill,
fragrant products with different scents
you,
are not a good idea for people with
yeah,
asthma.
you can kill the cat, let let the dog go
Exactly.
loose.
Now, you know what blew me away when I was about to write my book? I was in a bunch of Facebook groups with parents, and I was reading all these stories about how they said little Johnny's allergic to the dog, but they wouldn't get rid of the dog. And I called my mom and was like, Mom, she goes, somebody needs to call Child Protective Services on them. That poor child is dying. I was
Yeah,
like,
and
right?
this issue of the non-allergic dog is ridiculous. I mean, a
The
little dog,
Obamas have had they remember Bo was
but
allergenic.
a little dog in your face is worse than a big dog outside. So to talk about the chihuahuas and all these other things, that's nonsense. Any dog has a capacity to trigger symptoms, and cats. Don't even talk about cats. It's probably the worst antigen in
What
nature.
about the ones that don't have any hair? I forget what they're called.
It makes no sense. It's not the hair. It's the dander that causes the problem.
Okay.
So if you got a cat, but here's the thing, and I appreciate this. I've never had a patient, no matter how sick, give up an animal. Never. I mean, I've seen some in the intensive care unit, other places, but they are not going to give up an animal. But if you have a dog or a cat, there is no such thing as a non-allergic dog. I mean, I can say they don't. You say Chihuahuas were dog, and they would talk about the Aztec kings, but all those Aztec kings were dying at 16, 17, 18, probably from asthma. So if you got a little dog you holding like this, I don't care what kind of dog it is, and you're allergic to dogs, that's going to give you a problem. And so a big dog in the yard is better than having a little dog in your face. But
Wow.
I've never
But
seen it.
and that's so true though. People will keep these pets and it's like get rid of the pets.
You
Same thing with the foods. And honestly, a lot of in our community, a lot of times people don't get allergy testing, so they don't know that they're allergic to certain foods.
right.
But there is something that happens every time you eat this food, but you just ignore it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, let me tell you, the saddest patients in my practice are those patients who find out they have anaphylaxis and asthma when they eat seafood. I mean, that's the big one. Shrimp, crabs, some of this bad California gumbo. They all feel like they got to do it. I mean, it's not so bad. I can have a few, and a lot of them get into trouble because seafood allergies is often a problem after you're an adult. And I'm telling you, it's a sad. When I say, look, man, you allergic to shrimp and crab, to whisper because they get so emotional. But in any event, I think that you're right. I mean, some of the most dangerous situations with asthma I've seen is because people take foods that they know are accidentally or on purpose that they know are problematic for them.
Yeah, I'm allergic to seafood and I also can't smell it cooking. So I can walk into anybody's house and be like, whoa. And I immediately I just call it my inner whistle.
Yeah,
I start wheezing and I'm like, ooh, that inner
yeah,
whistle is getting awfully loud.
yeah. No, I think that's a common problem. Plus, I'm not, but I went to cooking school for over a year.
Oh wow.
So I understand basically a lot of the triggers. And, a lot of times I've had patients start wheezing when they were putting spices on or, dumping stuff in there. So, but I do think that I'm not saying you should never, ever, ever test that out. But I do think if you know you have a serious seafood allergy, nut allergy, milk allergy, egg allergy, then you need to avoid those foods because very quickly things can get out of hand.
And people don't, and then, you and I both know a lot of people don't carry epinephrine. So
Right,
therefore, when things quickly get out of hand, you don't have time to react because you don't have epinephrine to hold you over until the
right.
EMS arrives or until you get to the hospital.
Yeah,
Um, and which that's what the auto injectors are for. It's for
yeah,
you to take it right then so
right.
that when you call 911, they have time to get there and still
Yeah,
treat you.
yeah. That's one of the things that people don't recognize about epinephrine as a drug for asthma. I mean, it will work for asthma as well as some of the other, obviously, allergic problems. And I do think that most people want the machine. I got to have the machine. But what we
Breathing
do
machine?
with, yeah, the aerosol machines.
Yeah.
We don't give them in California much anymore because the study suggests that if you got a spacer with albuterol, that's just as effective. So even in emergency situations, but everybody wants a machine. So you don't have a machine. You just have the thing you have to have is two words: an action plan. So
Yep.
when you start to see things, slipping into darkness, then you need to have a plan to control your asthma at that point. Either it's changing the medicines or talking to your provider or going to the ER. But you need to have an action plan, especially those of you who either have children or yourselves have bad asthma and have had experiences like that where they ended up in the ICU or the hospital. You need to have an action plan. I think even now the sickest asthmatics, especially the adults, are responding to the biologics, which are
Right.
the new category of asthma products, which seem to work incredibly well. Dupixent and all the others, so many of them now. But biologics have changed the quality of life for people with severe intractable asthma that didn't respond to anything else. So we got a whole plethora of things from avoidance of triggers, either foods or animals or whatever, to solid medicines for people with severe intractable asthma and everything in between. So combining that, kind of putting together a, um, a potpourri of environmental controls and medications and action plans, you can stay out of the hospital. And
And
all
that's
you
why
have to
you
do is,
have to have an allergist or pulmonologist
yeah,
because your internal medicine doctor, your regular pediatrician may not be able to handle this.
yeah. Well, I think it's almost like baseball. When you say somebody is good at everything, I think that, and the best man up. I think that there are some primary care docs who really know a lot about asthma,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some specialists who don't care. I think pulmonologists, by and large, like in-hospital asthma, but they're not really that excited about outpatient management most of the time because it is a multifactorial problem, not just your FEV1 or your ability to move air through a machine. It has to do with triggers and compliance. Well, you can't say compliant adherence,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to do a lot of other things. So when you decide who's going to take care of your children, and they have serious asthma, you need to ask some questions about the primary care doctor before you choose that person because everybody doesn't have the same skill set. I'm a pediatrician as well as an allergist and a whole lot of stuff I don't know about as well, ADHD and
Right.
all, discipline. I don't understand the new disciplinary, approach to discipline in children. I mean,
Dental parenting.
I've got a whole school here. I don't understand timeout, none of that. But a
Right.
lot of things in pediatrics I don't understand. I'm not as good at as I am as allergy and asthma. So I have a lot of patients in my practice for pediatrics who know that because I mean I'm known kind of for that. And the same thing is true for you or your children. If you got a primary care doctor and he is your main contact between you and the hospital and the healthcare system, and you have asthma or any chronic disease, make sure they have a background or history of being able to manage these chronic disease problems, and especially asthma, because a lot of doctors feel they're born to take care of asthma and will give you 9 inhalers and a lot of other nonsense, which end up putting you at risk for some serious issues.
Yeah. So it was, and that was something else I put in the book too, was about the different specialists because people didn't realize there were specialists.
Yeah,
And so there is allergy and immunology, there's pulmonology. but you need to make sure that, like you said, ask questions, fire the doctor if necessary, because you need to make sure that you guys are on the same page and that they're there for you. Asthma attacks often happen at night, and if you can't reach the doctor in the middle of the night when you're at the ER, that can be problematic.
Well, I got a question for you. How come you don't give people the name of that book whenever you talk about it? What's the name of the book? Pull the book out and show people what the book is.
Mommy, I Can't Breathe, the modern guide to navigate allergies and asthma.
All right, now people know what book you're talking about.
And then here's a children's book about food allergies. No, Renee, you are allergic.
All right, so okay, that's a good thing. You need to
See, that's why we make a good team.
you need to be more of a
But I
sales.
wanted to, when you talked about the action plan, how many people actually have a peak flow meter so that they can,
Yeah.
check their peak flow so then they can go and look at their action plan and say, oh, I'm in the green zone, I'm in the yellow zone, I'm in the red zone.
Almost nobody.
Exactly.
Because I mean they depend upon their clinical perspective to determine how bad they are, or whether they need to go to work or they go to school or some other issue that prevents you from making a meaningful decision based upon the pathophysiology of your disease, which is what these peak flow meters do.
Yeah. And here's a spacer. We talked about this as well. So the inhaler goes on this end and you take the medicine through the spacer.
Yeah.
And do you know, I was trying to get one. I couldn't find this one and I was trying to get one for a demo I was doing on a video. And so I told the doctor, he called in the prescription and the pharmacy said, your insurance doesn't cover that.
Yeah.
I go, but you filled my inhaler prescription. So clearly you know that I have inhaler. So therefore I should have a spacer.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is just insurance.
Yeah, you know, I think that people are covering less and less. I think looking at the television every day, they're going to be covering less and less of less and less.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think you do. It does help to have a peak flow meter, and it does help to have a spacer. And if you're in the hospital, or your family member, your children in the hospital, you need both of those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And those books.
And I have a nebulizer. It's so cute and so small. I love it. It's battery operated. Thank you to Amron who gifted it to me.
Yeah.
But they sell them right there on Amazon too. But I think that when I'm really, really sick, it's hard for me to take in anything, inhaler or the nebulizer. Like I can't inhale.
Yeah. Well, you can get them for as low as $50 now, but we don't. We used to cover them in California, but they don't cover them anymore, and they stopped covering them when Texas Children's did a large study on the use of aerosol machines as opposed to those spacers, and found that spacers can, in many instances, be more effective. And so that's when they stopped covering them, and that quickly went across the nation. So we don't give them out anymore.
Gotcha. But yeah, I just, like I said, I feel like inhaling is so difficult when I'm sick. So I don't know how you can take a treatment. I mean, because I don't wear a mask. I don't have a mask on. I have the mouthpiece.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I see children mostly, so that's kind of weird.
They have masks, yeah.
With children, that's a very different thing. But
I was very excited when I was able to move up to the mouthpiece. That was a big deal. It was.
Okay, good. That's good for you.
I was very excited.
Yeah, but no, I think that when we look at across the spectrum, and I think the message from our discussion here is that there's no rationale for most children or adults to be in the emergency room and the hospital. We've got so much in our armamentarium now that's safe and effective, both from understanding the nature of your disease, whether it's a IL-5, IL-7, and we go all the way down to the dendritic cells now in understanding your disease. We understand what triggers it in most communities, and especially in communities with the underserved or the unhoused. We know that it's the chemicals and the environmental triggers that cause problems. We know now how to avoid some of those things, both collectively and locally, or from a governmental perspective, moving things out of your neighborhood that are threatening you. We got good medicines. I mean, I'm not saying I never started medicine without a plan to stop it, but we got great medicines now that will keep you from wheezing and reverse the problem. And if you've got an action plan, then you know when to kind of start that going early on. And I think that that's a way for you to avoid these triggers.
Exactly. And I think that it's it's so unfortunate not everyone has an action plan, but you have to have an action plan. So important to have one. But once you have the action plan, it can be tricky because of insurance to make sure you have what you need for the yellow zone, the red zone. Because I know I have my action plan and I have certain medications that I have to take. One of them was so expensive. I was like, oh my God, I can't buy that. And my insurance didn't cover it. And so thankfully, the doctor had a sample and he's like, well, hold on to this. If you get in trouble, you
Yeah.
know what to do. And I said, okay. And so that's
Yeah,
what we
well, I
did.
think most of the drugs that come out are kind of Me Too drugs now, and so consequently, most of them, a lot of them are not covered. I mean, I think one of the most effective drugs is Airasupra. I should give the scientific name, but it didn't mean anything to anybody. So, Airasupra was a pretty good drug. It's a short-acting beta agonist with an inhaled corticosteroid, and I think people can use it just like they would albuterol, and not only get the bronchodilator, but also get the anti-inflammatory agent. And I think it's a very useful drug. The other drugs like Symbicort, Dulera, and I think those are the only two out there now. Advir is kind of an older drug,
Right.
but those drugs are really pretty good. And we're not pushing drugs. I'm just saying you throw that in with good environmental controls and you know, avoiding the kinds of things you know cause you problems. These drugs are very effective.
And I said in my TEDx talk, I talked about how for the longest I was told not to exercise because of my asthma, but
Right,
really it was the exercise that ended up turning things around.
right,
So I think that people need to learn how to exercise correctly. There's actually a lot of the Olympic athletes have asthma. The
right,
fastest guy, Noah Lyles, he has asthma.
right.
Flojo had asthma.
Yeah,
And so all these people have asthma. It's just you have to manage it. That's all.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the message. That's the message for everybody listening to us today. That's the message is that we can do so many things we couldn't do. And I think part of the problem in black communities is that there are not enough specialists.
Right.
There are probably less than 200 black allergists in the country, maybe less than 100, when there must be 10,000 in San Francisco
Hmm.
alone. So I think that when you have a black doctor in your community, the studies show that black people do better.
Right.
I think that we as black doctors have now, especially now, when we have at the head of HHS a vaccine denier, a non-scientist, when we have these situations where you're not getting the proper information from CDC and the FDA, and now found out yesterday that FEMA's not even ready for the hurricane season, which has tremendous medical implications. And
Right.
so what we have to do is provide information that's true and relevant and transparent. That's what we do through the African American Wellness Project. And I have to congratulate blackdoctor.org. They do a tremendous job of providing you with the information you need for conditions you don't even know you have
Right.
and didn't suspect you had, and sometimes you don't have. But they do a tremendous job. If you go on that website and you work with them, you can find information for just about anything that you need to
Hmm.
know. And they seem to post every 2 or 3 hours, and
Yep.
so
A newsletter with more information.
we
Hmm.
have programs for the consumer, programs for the doctors. I think it's a tremendous institution, blackdoctor.org. And so I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to present a message through that vehicle.
Yeah. And then also, like I said, you have to follow African American Wellness Project, and you have to listen to the podcast, Black Doctors Speak. Check it out
Yeah,
because there's great
yeah,
information.
we got to get going back. I think we should do it together. I think we'd have a ball. I
We
mean,
would.
we're not going to be as popular as Shannon Sharp, but I think we can make a bigger impact together than we can individually
Yeah,
because
definitely.
we
But
both.
I think that the other thing that bothers me so is that, unfortunately, like you said, there's not enough black allergists, but a lot of people don't realize a lot of these allergists, especially after COVID, are doing telemedicine. So
Right,
even if you can't go to one physically,
right,
this is something that they can treat. They could virtually treat you.
right.
So
Yeah,
you should definitely try to look into that and see if that's if that's something that you can do, because it is necessary. BlackDoctor.org originally was a catalog of black physicians. Well, that's still there. So if you need to find a black doctor, any specialty, you can go to blackdoctor.org and you can search for your city and state, whatever specialty you're looking for, and
yeah,
try to find a black doctor.
yeah. Another good resource is the Asthma Allergy Network.
Yes,
They have a lot of good information.
Allergy Asthma Network.
Yeah, they have a lot of good information. They almost too much information. And not only that, they have coaches and stuff that you can do.
Yes.
So both those sites are worth somebody that, especially underserved communities, because the literacy level for some of these other sites are really very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we try to break it down and tell it like it is, and I think that, and like we lecture the black community, you got to do your part too. You can't just be people saying, well, this poor black community, they don't understand. That's why they don't, that's nonsense. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think we have a very intelligent community, very interested in holistic health and preventive health and early detection and disease prevention is where we need to make our move. But at the same time, I think that we have an opportunity here to share with you information on multiple places. And certainly blackdoctor.org, the African American Wellness Project, and the Asthma Allergy Network. Between those three, you're going to get a lot of really good information.
Yeah, allergyasthmanetwork.org. If you go to their website on any day, you can put in your zip code and you can check the air quality.
Right.
You can be prepared.
Yeah.
Today in Chicago, it is 90 degrees, and I
Yeah.
don't know where it came from, but it is
Right.
so hot. But at least I went outside today. At least I felt like I could breathe. But during those wildfires, that
Yeah.
information was so helpful, because there were several days that you could see the smoke, one,
Yeah.
without going outside, but
Yeah.
then that you knew you need to wear a mask outside, because
Yeah.
the last thing I want to do is to reverse all the wonderful things I've done to these lungs. I would like to keep it this way, which is why, knock on wood, I never got COVID, because I was serious about not getting COVID, because I
Yeah.
knew COVID would send me back into having to take medicine every day, maybe
Yeah.
even treatments every day. And
Yeah.
so I'm very, very, very protective of these lungs, because we have been through it. And anybody who's ever had trouble breathing knows that it's not fun. And
Right.
so I don't want to ever experience that again. So therefore, I work really hard to keep everything good. But yeah, Allergy Asthma Network and network.org. Last week we went to the Capitol,
Right.
and we had 5 bills that we were trying to get help get passed. And one of them was the chronic disease bill, and that was talking about getting these things covered, and then
Yeah.
there was a copay one, which is very important too, because
Yeah.
I grew up knowing that my little yellow Prevental inhaler was $2, because that's my parents' insurance was $2,
Right.
and then I became a big person and was like, it's not $2.
No. No.
so, so I'm so glad that several companies have capped and capped how much they can charge. So now it's like 35, I think, is the most they can charge for
Yeah.
albuterol.
Yeah, but asthma requires not just environmental controls in medicine, but you need to check out your resources. Like,
Yeah.
where am I going to go if I have a problem? What hospital am I going to go to? What does my insurance cover?
Yep.
I mean, you need to know all of that before, if you or your children have a chronic disease.
Especially these kids who are graduating and
Yeah,
going away to college somewhere in the fall.
right,
You
right,
need to have all that information before you step foot on campus. You
right,
need to have all your prescriptions. You need to know where you're going to go, like you said. You need to know exactly who can treat you, if because your doctor's far away, and
yeah,
you need to make sure you do all of that before you step foot on campus and move into the dorm.
yeah. And I think that here again, you're right. You got to understand your resources, what's available to you, where it is. Selecting your doctor, we've already talked about how important that is. Trying to get a second opinion, getting a specialist. You have to have that all together before you start the week,
Yep.
before you start the school year, before you start sending your children off to college.
Yeah.
Let me digress. If you want me to treat your child for ADHD, please at least have them know the symptoms when you come in here. You know what I mean? Don't come in here and not know what they're supposed to say to me. But anyway, getting back to the asthma
Yeah.
thing, I do think that you have to have a complete understanding of all the things that you need to do to have a very solid health control program. And that's where the African American Wellness Project has its spot. And we do have a lot of information to tell you how to deal with certain situations and how to select your and build your own healthcare system. Talking about advocates and navigation of the system itself. If you don't understand the system or it's too complicated, get somebody who can help you,
Yep.
especially if you got asthma. Get somebody, don't get your cousin who doesn't know anything about health. Find someone who's got a healthcare, background and then have them be part of your process. Especially if you're older with very serious COPD and asthma, you're really going to need an advocate and sometimes you'll be too sick to advocate for yourself, and you're going to need a navigator. That's why it's important for you to understand your resources and your insurance. What will they pay? Where do you have to go to get the services? All of that needs to be set up before an acute system occurs.
Yeah, my best friend was my roommate, and so she knew exactly everything. She knew where my insurance card was. She knew my parents' names, knew how to call them, all the things. So in college,
Yeah,
there was nothing for me to worry about. I knew
yeah,
that somebody knew. And if you are rooming blind, then you need to get to know your roommate before you go because they need to know you have this condition. And God forbid something happen, an allergen that you weren't accustomed to at home gets introduced to you, then you might get into one of these acute situations where you can't talk for yourself and you
yeah,
need somebody. You need to communicate with the resident assistant on the dorm. I was registered as a handicapped student in college, and they knew, and they actually took me to all my classes because I went to Michigan State. Michigan State's the equivalent of 10 football fields. And at the time, my asthma wasn't as great as it is now. And so it was going to be a beast in wintertime for me to do that. And so I was a handicapped student. I rode the handicap bus and I went door to door from my dorm to the classrooms for all my classes. And I also had a parking pass for me to drive to all of them. So even from freshman year, when most freshmen can't have a car, I had one because I was a handicapped student. But all these things, my mother, she was so smart. She is so smart. She investigated all this stuff before I got to school. So then it was all handled. In school, we also talked about the One School, One Nurse Act last week. And that's a very important bill because a lot of schools don't have a school nurse, but a lot of these kids need medication during the day.
mhm,
And the schools that don't have nurses really they don't want to do it because they don't want, they just don't want that liability on themselves because they're not medical professionals.
yeah,
So those kids might have to find a different school to go to. And so it's really, really, really important we get a nurse in every school so that they can take care of these kids in case they do have an attack, allergy, something happens, an anaphylaxis, or just for them to take their daily medications. I remember I used to have to go to the office and take it was some tablet. Alupent. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Pick that up? Okay.
Mhm,
That's what it was. I used to take that in the middle of the day. And the nurse, she had the pills and she gave them to me. Now, I did carry my inhaler, my Prevental. I carried that myself, but she had my pills in the office. So, One School, One Nurse is really important that they pass that because these kids
mhm,
need help.
okay.
And then there's the asthma control program, unfortunately, that the man in office, I refuse to call him anything, but he feels that that's not important, but it is very important.
Mhm.
And the first people it's going to affect is us. So we need to make sure that we do hold on to that. If you saw someone who was newly diagnosed, especially in the Black community, what are the top three pieces of advice for managing asthma or allergies effectively?
Right. And what was your statement?
I said, if you saw someone newly diagnosed, especially in the Black community, what are your top three pieces of advice for managing their asthma or allergies effectively?
First of all, organize your history so that you know what your triggers are. That's the first thing. Secondly, ask questions about medicines. What are they useful for? How should you use them? And when can you stop them? And finally, make sure that you understand that this is not going to be a one-off in many instances, that this is a chronic problem, that even if you're not wheezing or short of breath, it may still be present. And so you have to treat it like you treat any other chronic issue. When you chronically can't pay your bills, when you chronically can't drive your car, when you can't do anything, you plan. And the same thing is true when you have asthma. You got to plan for it to be chronic and take the steps to make sure that you're ready to try and prevent it and to treat it when it occurs acutely.
And as we honor Asthma and Allergy Awareness Month, what message do you want to leave with our viewers about advocating for their health and pushing for equity in care?
Yes, I think that you have to recognize, especially now, that in many instances you're on your own. You no longer trust the information comes from the CDC or other places. So you have to look for trusted, vetted sources, such as the blackdoctor.org or the African American Wellness or the Asthma and Allergy Network. And then you have to start to realize that you're in this on your own. I mean, the feds have just kind of bowed out and trying to provide not just direct the services, but to support services that you are used to seeing in your community. That guy's fired 10,000 people from Health and Human Services. Can you imagine what that's going to look like in your community? And so consequently, you better do it on your own. And I think sticking with us and trying to get the information on a regular basis, I think will be helpful to you. But here again, you got to be ready now because the things that you've trusted for so many years are no longer reliable.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening, Dr. Lenoir. This has been a fabulous conversation. I want to tell you, Tasha Cole said, I love this. Thanks for sharing. All my kids have asthma and have been to Dr. Lenoir before.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So yes, unfortunately, he's all the way in California, but.
Okay, two things. Let me thank you for all that you do to provide health education for people around the country. And give me the name of those books. You don't know how to sell no book. Tell us what the name of the books.
Renee, you are allergic.
Right.
And Mommy, I Can't Breathe.
Okay.
The Modern Guide to Navigate Allergies and Asthma. You can go to my website, AskDrRenee.info, hit books. You can also go to Amazon, Target, all sorts of places. No, not Target. Excuse me. Forgot.
You need to learn how to sell a book. All right. Thank you.
I've done so many shows about those books.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And we will see you again next week. But this was Food Allergy Awareness Week. So I hope that you have been watching my reels. I've been doing reels every day. And I did talk about the books in there in a lot of the reels. But today's reel covered how to actually use the epinephrine auto-injectors with needles. Because I'm really excited about Neffy. I am waiting to get my hands on one so I can show everyone. But Neffy is the first needleless auto-injector. So it goes in the nose, much like Narcan for the people who are having a drug overdose. So.
There are three new drugs that people need to know about. One is the medicine, nasal epinephrine that you just talked about. The other is Supra, which is the short-acting beta agonist with the inhaled corticosteroid. And the third is the allergy shot Xolair for food allergy to protect people against sudden or unexpected anaphylaxis secondary to foods.
Yes, so please, if you're not aware of these, please make sure you get the information, especially if you have allergic asthma or food allergies. Xolair and Neffy are very important for you. And Air Supra, if you have asthma, it's a game changer. You wouldn't have to worry about albuterol, and it's a game changer.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.